Welcome to the IP2 podcast. I'm Shea Ashby, and as always, I'm joined by Felix Chung. We have a very special guest today, Dylan Davis, who you may know as Gorganian Tome or Cathartigan.
Dylan has been a content creator for over half a year, focusing on long-term content, and a member of the online fab community for much longer. His channel, Gorganian Tome, has recently received broad accolades for his video essay, Flesh and Blood is a Fighting Game. But as of the time of this recording, that video is the fourth of 5 long-form video essays, and we really look forward to discussing these more today. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you. That was so it sounded so cool to hear it right out like that.
You're a cool guy, Dylan, and
Oh, thank you.
can't wait to talk with you today.
Yeah, we're really excited about this episode.
Yeah.
We usually like to start off with like the old elevator pitch. So can you tell us
Sure.
a little bit about yourself and a background on your history in games and whatnot?
For sure. Yeah. So, my name is Dylan, and I was born and raised in Utah, and then during I went to study my master's for a master's of fine arts degree in fiction writing in Illinois in Southern Illinois University, and from there I met my now wife, and then we moved to. She's German, so then we moved to Southern Germany. And it was there actually where I found Fab. But before that, I was playing Magic. I played Magic throughout college. I'm not one of those people that I hear this story all the time of people who started playing Magic when they were like 12, and then they got to high school, they stopped playing, and then they graduate from high school and they either start playing again in college or they start playing again after college. And I started a lot later. I started at like 18 or so. After a couple of years, I stopped playing it, and then Hearthstone came out. And because I wasn't much of a card gamer, but I played the Hearthstone I loved until I realized why I don't love it. And then and then went back to Magic, and I was like, yeah, it's still pretty good. But then when I moved to Germany, my really good friend messaged me saying, have you heard of Flesh and Blood? Because he and I play Magic together all the time. And I said, no, I haven't heard of it. And so I bought my original cards. Cards were really hard to get in Europe at that time. But I got, you guys probably have heard of him, Ian TCG.
Yep.
He used to sell cards. Yeah. Ian Zhang. And I don't think he does anymore, but I love to shout him out everywhere I can because he's really cool. I just actually finally met him at Battle Hardened, Germany.
Nice. And
it was just like a really weird, like parasocial thing. Cause it wasn't even like parasocial. Like he doesn't really do a lot. He doesn't do a lot of like interviews. It was like, oh my God, you sold me my first cards. And also probably the reason why I'm a content creator. It's very strange to see you. But yeah, I mean, game 1 of Flesh and Blood, I was like, I'm in. This is like the coolest game. It was really hard to get stuff though. And I because in Europe, like if your game is not on Card Market, which is like our biggest secondary market retailer, it's really hard to grow. It's really hard to get cards. So I kind of put it down, and then at Uprising at Fab 2.0, the cards were on Card Market, and I was like, I'm done. Like this is the game I'm playing, because my mind is just perfect, or as close to perfect as you can get. As far as like history with gaming, it's more like card gaming is like a really intense part of my gaming life, but it's not a very long one. I've been playing card games for about a decade, and the rest of my life was like, I played a lot of shooters. I played a lot of PC games, a lot of strategy games, but I always played games. And I realized this in my late 20s, I always played games that told stories better than other games. And I don't mean stories in terms of like narrative, which is stapled onto a game, I mean, the game itself tells a story. The ludic elements tell the story, right? If you guys are familiar with RimWorld, for example.
A little bit.
Yeah. A game is it considers itself a fiction generator. And it's brilliant. It's an incredible fiction generator because it understands fiction. And in my background with fiction, I've always been chasing this. Like I've written for a bunch of games for like the story, and I've made a couple. I've made one really fun game that, or at least it's fun for me. That's based on my novel that I wrote while I was in my master's degree. And so yeah, I've always been kind of chasing that thing of like, what is the game that can tell the best story? And that's something we can talk about. I could talk about that for days without sleeping and eating, etc.
Something that really speaks to me about what you said was, you know, or something that I'm reminded of is ludonarratives and ludonarrative dissonance. And this is a huge thing when it comes to the board game community, which is where Shea and I come from more than trading cards. Just for a game like Agricola, the board game, do you feel like you're a farmer? Do you feel like you're working year to year to feed your family and there's all these pressures, or do you not? And if you don't, does that impact your enjoyment of a game? And hearing you speak those words in that way, yeah, just reminds me that there's a lot of different ways which people enjoy and engage with gaming, and that's why it's such a powerful medium, I guess.
I would consider myself like, there's a term I really like from another podcast called the Dive Down. It's a Magic podcast. And I don't really play competitive Magic anymore, but I still like listening to them. And they call themselves the podcast for the casual spike. And that's what I consider myself. Like, I really like to be competitive. Being competitive is fun. But I can't get that, like, I will kill you competitive. Like, I can't get that cutthroat. Like, I can't get that way. It just doesn't work for me. So it doesn't work for my personality. So like, I like to win. I like to compete. But if the game is not telling me an interesting story, I'm not going to be able to get it. Like, I'm just not gonna, it's not going to work. It has to be able to do that too.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned not like that specific story that's being told in front of you. Can you give me an example of more kind of what you're talking about when a game is telling a story that's not just like some narrative in front of you?
Right. Yeah. So the way that I like to, and this is where actually Flesh and Blood is a fight scene. My video comes from, because in fiction, people don't really like to think of fiction like this, because they like to think that fiction is like this, it's like this artistic form born of the gods, and the muses came to you and they were like, by the way, this is what you should do. But like there's a really concise form for how to generate emotion through story. And it's by establishing what the entering emotion of a character is, presenting a conflict which is at odds with their entering emotion, right? So if a character is happy, then the conflict of that needs to be, you should not be happy. And then the exiting emotion needs to be the opposite of what the entering emotion is, right? So if you're happy, you're presented with a conflict, you leave the scene sad. You need to be opposite. And then you go into the next scene sad, and then you need to go back to happy, right? And this is how it goes. This is every single piece of fiction ever, every successful piece of fiction.
Right.
So what I talk about with that in games is like being able to simulate that roller coaster of emotion well. So like in Flesh and Blood, this is what I talk about in Flesh and Blood as a fight scene, is that it already has a lot of the, let me back up a little bit. So a game story is innately second person, because when you're playing a game, the game is like, imagine you're reading the game as though it were a book. It would say, you put your farmer on the crop area, right? You spent too much money and therefore lost your, market share at the end of the Monopoly season. I've never played Monopoly. Sure. I don't know. But the you question is the really important one, right? And so when all games are innately second person, that means that the character that you're watching in the game world needs to be close enough to the player that they can feel the emotion with the game character simultaneously, right? So you can't have like, and then Dorinthia was really sad, right? Like, I play the card that says Dorinthia is really sad, It can't be the case. The
Mhm.
emotion needs to be felt by the player, not by Dorinthia, right?
Yep.
And that's the way that you can best simulate the narrative structure through game. Like the game needs to do what it does best, which is make game mechanics that simulate emotions in the player. And this is why I have so many complaints about game stories in general. That like when you look at like a lot of people say like, well, you shoot 200 people and therefore ludonarrative dissonance. And it's like, well, it's not necessarily ludonarrative dissonance in that regard. The problem is that people don't work hard. Like the game developers don't work hard enough to make that feel emotional for the player. And so, yeah, anyway, that's kind of my thing. So your question specifically, did I answer your question? I hope I did.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. But let me, your question was, give you an example about how games can tell a story.
Yeah.
And the way that, for example, Flesh and Blood, the way that I think of Flesh and Blood can tell a really good story is that moment when it's about 30 minutes into the game and you look over at your deck and you have a lot fewer cards than you thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go to draw up your 4 and you're like, ooh, I'm more tired than I was expecting, right? Or conversely, you go to draw up and you see your opponent go to draw up and they have a lot fewer cards in their deck than you thought. And you're looking at your deck and you have a lot more than they do, right? And there's this moment, this kind of emotional response where it's like, do I need to pivot here? What do I need to do, right? And that moment is a very interesting moment because it does a very good job of simulating a turn, which a turn in fiction is an emotional switching
Mm-hmm.
based on the new information, right? So like entering emotion, conflict, and then there's a turn right after the conflict, which is where the character shifts their emotion, right? And they go, oh, that's how it is in this scene. Got it. Now I'm going to feel like this going on my way out. And so if you go in, you're like, I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to be aggressive. And then you look at your deck and it's almost empty and you're like, I can't be aggressive. I've got to switch.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm going to go back. And this is the game. There's no narrative. There's no written prescribed narrative taking place in that. It's just that the game, either by happenstance or by design, has figured out a way to create that emotional response in you while you're playing. And that's incredible to me.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example, actually. Like even just tonight at our pre-release, I think everybody is at one point in their career of Flesh and Blood is, like you said, look down at their deck and going, I got 4 cards left.
Yep.
How am I going to win? And
Yep.
you're right. It kind of evokes a sense of emotion that you weren't necessarily expecting to have just playing a card game.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, no, this kind of stuff has a way of impacting you as a player in a way that seems odd when you look at it from a third-party perspective or a robotic perspective. But when you're embroiled in that fight, and I feel this as keenly in Flesh and Blood as I do in the most intense video game or even watching sports, you feel this to a certain extent, right? Your team is ahead, your team has the momentum, but suddenly they give up the ball and the other team goes in for a big score. Like there's a roller coaster of emotions there, far above and beyond the physical mechanical actions of the players on the pitch or on the rink or on the court.
Right.
But here when we play Flesh and Blood, it's so visceral, and you and the hero are almost one, right? And you're feeling those emotions up and down with the hero.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like another great example to carry on with this is that I just thought of is the From Software games. This is what they understood more and better than anybody else in the industry, is that if they push the prescribed narrative into like into the ethereal, right, where it's like it's pretty hard to understand what's going on in those games sometimes. It doesn't matter, because what they understand is that they're a game, and they don't tell a game through traditional narrative. They tell a game through the emotions of the player. And you don't evoke emotions through the player through the story. You evoke emotions through the player via play. And so when you beat that dude, I mean, I've never sworn so much in my life as when I've played Bloodborne and Dark Souls. Like I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah.
That frustration and then that inevitable win, that's actually the addictive thing. So it's funny to me when I hear people talk about it, because it's like, well, you're not actually addicted to the story. You're addicted to the story in a different way.
Yeah.
Like you love the narrative of you triumphing, right? Even though your avatar is the one who actually swung the digital sword at the digital demon, you are the one who triumphed, right? You beat them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm talking about. And so that in Flesh and Blood evokes that same thing. And it's really hard because like I have a really hard time. I know that it's considered bad manners when you play against other players, but if there's a really intense match, and I can get, and when I say intense match, I mean like this happens to me at my armor at least once a week. But when I have a really intense match and I win it, I try really hard not to like do it, but I'm always like, oh. I try,
Yeah.
because I know it's considered like not nice to do, not to have like this catharsis of emotion at the end of the match, but like I can't help it. It's like I do that when I'm watching Lord of the Rings. You know, it's so hard.
Their matches can be like very stressful. You're sitting there
Mhm.
thinking that you're about to win. What could your opponent possibly have? And you're like, okay, I've presented them with what I think is the end of the game where I'm going to win, and they
Mhm.
don't just concede immediately. And you're like, oh my god, what do they have?
Mhm.
What are they thinking about? What can they
Right.
do to circumvent what I've just done? And yeah, then they eventually put their cards down, reach out their fist or their hand to congratulate you. I think we've all experienced it,
Right.
and yeah, you don't want to necessarily put it out there to, maybe make them feel bad, but like, we've all been there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just, it might just be a little too much in an armory. Like,
Yeah.
But at the battle hardened level, I mean, when I went and worked at the battle hardened Germany, I helped on the back end with the stream and like interviewed players and stuff. And I was always amazed. One of the things that really stood out to me pretty quickly was I'd be watching the match the whole time, and then one would win, and then there would be that release of emotion, and I would walk up to the winner and I'd be like, "Do you want to do an interview?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And but what I noticed before that was that the two players would continue to talk after the match. They were like, "Oh man, when you did that, and I had that in Arsenal, and but like
Yeah.
they were going back and forth, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is gold." And so when the matches started ending, I was like, "Do you guys want to talk to each other on camera with two microphones?"
Right.
And like before you get going, because what you're like telling the story of the match, and you're going to do it better than me. So I grab them and I bring them to the camera, and I'm like, "Here are your microphones. Continue to talk about what you were just talking about."
Yeah.
And they did such a better job at explaining what happened in that last match than I ever could have, that I was like, why don't more people do this? I mean, I understand like a lot of people don't want to do the interview.
Yep.
But it was so interesting to watch them talk about it, because they were so much more emotionally invested than I was in the match, right? Just innately, because they're in the match. And so, yeah, I don't know. It was just a really interesting thing to watch happen.
Is there a way to check that out? Like is there VODs?
I know that we had, because what we did was we had like this project where we sent the stream out to a bunch of different European content creators,
Yep.
because like there's so many different languages here. So we had like a Polish stream, a Spanish stream, but I think there might be a raw stream somewhere that you can just skip around and find the interviews.
Yeah, that actually sounds really interesting to watch, because like a lot of times, even just watching Armory stream on YouTube or going back and watching VODs, you can hear the players talking, but then the commentators come over, or there's too much
Right.
background that you can't hear. And I personally have always been interested in hearing what the players are talking about at their match, because even as a viewer, you're also invested. Maybe you have an affinity with one of the players, and they won or they
hero.
lost, and you want to hear what they're talking about, because as a spectator, I think you're invested in the match as well, to a certain degree.
Right. Totally.
So it'd be interesting to see if there.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. I'll see if I can find it.
Cool. Another further question to this topic: have you always enjoyed thinking about games and your hobbies like on a higher level and something more than just what's presented to you?
Yeah, in some way. Basically what's year on year, I just add more vocabulary to talk about it. Like that's kind of what I've discovered is going back through my history. I always gravitated towards games that did something like this, and I didn't realize it. But I like so like a standout game for me is like Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay, where like a lot of people wouldn't consider this game like a really good narrative game, but the emotions that that game evoke through just its existence are really interesting to me, and I loved that game. So like while people were playing, you know, the latest Call of Duty, I was like Chronicles of Riddick. And looking back on that, it's like, okay, I think I kind of understand why. I get why I was doing that. I just didn't know at the time. And then around about early mid 20s, when I was starting to understand narrative more, that was when I started like developing this higher level understanding, or this affinity for trying to analyze all of the games and why I love them. Just to understand games, right?
Yeah.
Like, but it was about that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's take a bit of a step into the content that you make nowadays. And
Sure.
I mean, would you characterize the videos that you make on Gorganian Tome as video essays?
Yeah, I would consider them video essays.
Yeah.
That's Ira of Mysteria on Twitter. She recently put out a, what content do you make? And I kind of jokingly said that I write essays about Flesh and Blood, or I write essays about arts and history, and then I use the other to examine the other.
Yeah.
So like I'm either writing about something in arts or history, and then I'm using Flesh and Blood to examine that, or I'm writing an essay about Flesh and Blood and I'm using arts or history to examine Flesh and Blood. And that's kind of like the elevator pitch, I guess, or the best way to describe the channel.
No, that's super cool and super unique as of right now, at least within the Flesh and Blood sphere. Would you be able to just tell us in your own words? I guess some people may not even be familiar with what a video essay is. Would you mind just giving everyone a 30-second spiel about the format itself and what makes it compelling to you?
Yeah. So the thing about video essays, I'm going to try to do this in 30 seconds
Yep.
because I love essays. So very quick thing. I used to teach English at the university. So a video essay, and this is one of the reasons why I fell in love with video essays, is I love that they're the exact same as essays. They are essays that you read into a microphone, and then you put cool pictures with, right? And but a video essay will operate on the fundamental same qualities as any essay you wrote in high school or college, which is that you need to have a thesis statement, you need to have multiple arguments that back up that thesis statement, and you need a good conclusion, right? And that's it. And so that's ultimately a video essay is an essay that takes a lot longer, and it requires a couple more skills like video editing,
Right.
and audio editing. But that's ultimately what it is. It's pick a subject, develop a thesis on it, write to it, and then put nice pictures to it in a video editor.
I like, Felix, how you asked Dylan to describe video essays, but not ludonarrative dissonance, which I had never heard of this term until now.
Oh boy, yeah, good point. I think because
Well,
I've said the words ludonarrative dissonance so many times throughout my life,
Right.
I figured it was just common language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to
Well,
this
I think-
person over here.
I can also briefly describe that one in 30 seconds.
Since
I
we're here,
think
sure.
you're the most qualified person to do so. So please.
Okay, so there's something called ludology, right? Ludology is the study of game. And then there's something called narratology, and that's the study of story, right? And so a lot of people like to consider ludology and narratology separate forms, but there's a new kind of thought process, which is that there's a spectrum between ludology and narratology. So like think of it like a scale, right? At 1, completely ludology, that's like Go, or I don't want to say chess, because chess actually is pretty good at telling a narrative, but think of the most abstract board game you can think of, right? Mahjong or something. That's like a 1 on the ludology scale,
Mm-hmm.
and then the narratology scale is like a novel, right? And the degree of interactivity is what determines where it lands on the scale. So there's the ludological and the narratological spectrum. And so where ludonarrative dissonance comes in is the or at least in my opinion, the slight misunderstanding that these are 2 separate things and that they don't exist on the same spectrum. And so what they think is that there's ludology and there's narratology. And if you put them together in the same form, then if you put like a video game, for example, and you're doing stuff in play that doesn't match what's in the story, there's a dissonance between the 2 things, right? So a classic example is like Nathan Drake games. Have you played the Uncharted games? So Nathan Drake is like a Indiana Jones, happy-go-lucky, like, yeah, I'm a normal dude, what's going on? And then he like shoots 55 people going through a city. And it's like, well, he can't be both. Like it can't be, he's either evil and he murders people willy-nilly, or he's a fun, happy-go-lucky Indiana Jones dude. And that's ludonarrative dissonance. It's like this clashing of these 2 things.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of times in board games, because I was a big nerd when it came to board games, and whenever there was a game where it felt like you were supposed to do something within the narrative of the game, but the mechanics of the game, or you just weren't sold on your actions. Like, again, I talked about Agricola. To me, Agricola, which is a game, about farming, but it's not like you're a big multi-million-dollar like farming conglomerate.
Monsanto.
You're a family that's scrapping to feed itself every year, and you feel that pressure. Like if you can't feed your family, you get a begging token because your family has to beg for food on the street. Like it's very satisfying in that way.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh god, I might have to pick up a copy of that game.
Yeah.
That right there, like that begging token is like emotions. They're thinking about it.
Yeah. That's right. So I do feel stressed out when I play that game, just as I would imagine I would be stressed out if I were a subsistence farmer in the Middle Ages. Like that's ludonarrative. For you, but
and it's all through. You didn't read you read the word begging. That's all you did. Everything else is from the mechanics, right? There's nothing innate about that token that should make you feel that way, but the way that it's used and the design of the game evokes this feeling of guilt, right? Which is what you're supposed to feel.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh my god, a game can do that. A game can make you feel guilt. I think this is actually why a lot of people really love board games over video games as well. Because I think board games tend to design toward this more.
Man, we are wandering a lot, so thanks for for staying
That's
with us,
good.
everyone.
It's my fault that we're wandering.
Oh man,
this is what I mean. This is, if you wanted to interview Gorganian Tome and get a sense of what Gorganian Tome's life is like, it's like this. It's going ludonarrative dissonance. There's a spectrum. Let's follow. What does this game do? You know, like this is the everyday.
Well, let's head back to video essays, and I mean just to share a little bit. I mean, video essays have been a big part of your life, as you've explained, Dylan. Been a big part of my life as well. I remember when YouTube came out, or at least got popular, when I was in high school, and the first video essays that I remember were 10 minutes long exactly, because that's how long YouTube videos were supposed to be. And it's like the meaning of Ocarina of Time, or
in 10 minutes.
This explained. And it just went from there. And there's so many great video essays nowadays. We mentioned some of my favorite, Lindsay Ellis, Every Frame a Painting, and Dan Olson, who is also from Calgary, just like Shea and I.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I mean, did you draw inspiration for Gorganian Tome, your channel, from any of these creators?
Definitely Lindsay Ellis, definitely Every Frame a Painting, but I would say that the 3 biggest influences on my channel, and this will come as no surprise, are Ristic Studies, number 1, like King of the Mountain. Ristic studies. He's like, he's basically doing what I'm doing, except for he focuses a little bit more on the art history of Magic cards. And if you have not seen Ristic studies, just go after this podcast, listeners, go watch those videos, because he is like, I put this out on Twitter the other day. He is approaching mastery of his craft. He is incredible. He's so good at what he does. But yeah, so Ristic studies, number 1. Number 2, Spice 8 Rack. Spice 8 Rack is another Magic content creator, but he makes these incredible long form documentaries about like Magic mechanics and communism, basically, because he's a self-proclaimed communist, and excuse me, he doesn't use traditional pronouns. The videos of Spice 8 Rack are very much focused on like he'll do a video on Yawgmoth, a creature in Magic's lore, and then it'll turn into a 2.5 hour documentary about eugenics and like and euthanasia, and they're brutal and amazing. They're so good. Number 2. Number 3, Corey Gaming, which is basically a documentarian video essayist about fighting games, and I love Corey Gaming. Gerald is his name, and he's so good at what he does. But those are my 3 major influences, and who I learned from the most, I would say. And then probably 4th would be Lindsay Ellis, because she's so damn good at it.
Oh yeah. No, there's such a rich history of video essayists on YouTube throughout all the years, and I mean, now we have Gorganian Tome representing Flesh and Blood as well, so that's really awesome. And I mean, do you feel like there's a rich enough environment out there, let's say, because you mentioned that there's 2 very large notable content creators covering the Magic landscape from their own perspectives. Flesh and Blood is a younger game,
right?
Even from the raw number of cards available to analyze. I don't know if that's the right metric, but even from that metric, the amount of the landscape out there to look at is just vastly less. Is there enough there to keep you going, to keep you interested, enough cool corners to look at?
Yeah. So yes, there's definitely enough. The question is how, for me anyway, is how creative can I get with the angles, right? Because you're right. I mean, like looking at Flesh and Blood cards, the one thing that I just wish there was a little bit more of is flavor text. That's like that's my literal only, like, please, just a little more flavor text. So I look at a card like Snatch, and it just says, if it hits, draw a card.
Right.
And I'm like, there's so much space. Just a little line, like anything at all. A quote from a character, or the Solana has a mixed relationship with their street urchins, or whatever. Anything.
Yeah, is this someone stealing to harm someone, or is this someone stealing because they can't put food on the table? I mean, it's a vastly different emotion, and all of that. Yeah.
So how do you keep track of that? Do you have like a Charlie Day board somewhere, or can you sort of track all of that in your mind? You read these tidbits and these things on the cards. How do you correlate them, or remember that, I saw this on, Mangle back in Crew, and we're, 10 sets later?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I have a folder of all the current cards that have flavor text. So it's kind of like just a rolling, like I update it.
Yeah.
And I grab, I'm like, oh, that one has flavor text. Grab it, put it in the folder. So I can just have like my one-stop shop to go look at look at all the cards that have flavor text. Yeah. But yeah, there's definitely enough there. It's just a matter of developing creative angles about it, right? So, like, for example, you guys might have seen how, because I've talked about it a lot, how much I've struggled to make the Prism video.
Yeah.
And I want to make a Prism video. I want to do, like, there's a number of series I want to do. So like the story of Starvo, right? That is episode 1 in a series of videos I want to do about each hero that reaches Living Legend. And the original plan was to do Prism. Like, so it was going to be Starvo, Prism, Chain, and then probably Oldhim after that.
Yeah.
And and I sat down to write the prison video, and it quickly ballooned in like into 15,000 words, and I was like, this is, and it was really rambly, and it didn't have a subject, and it just wasn't working, so I scrapped it all. And I was like, okay, let's go back. And I grabbed Phantasm. I grabbed my section on Phantasm, and I made that into a video so I could talk about Phantasm. And in that moment, I think it becomes relatively clear how much you can actually talk about in Flesh and Blood, because I had like a 15,000 word essay about Prism, and I could have broken that out into 4 different videos.
Yep.
Right. And I don't want to do that all the time, but there's enough. Like, think of it just at the number of keywords in the game, or like I could, because there's Phantasm, I could do a video on Dominate, I could do a video on Go Again, I could do a video on so many things.
Yep.
Or like draw a card. What does that mean, right? Like if you're thinking about and again, like when you're in the world of like, what does a Ludo narrative do? What does it mean to draw a card? There's so much to talk about. There's so much. It's not always going to be clear, but that's why I like to do this exploratory stuff where I just kind of start going, and I'm like, okay, drawing a card means a new thought has entered the mind. So new neurons are connected. Okay, what does that mean if new neurons are connected in actual psychology? And you can see where it goes from here, right? So like, oh, there's neurons connecting in the middle of the fight, brains, and then I can do an essay on brains and drawing a card.
You've made me so excited for your upcoming videos about Dominate and Go Again and all those other keywords, because now that you've said it, I mean, and I should have made this connection when watching your Phantasm video, but really, because Flesh and Blood is quite narratively consistent in that it feels like you're in a 1v1 fight, or duel of some kind. I can picture very well what Dominate means. To me, Dominate means this attack is coming in with such force that you can't bring your full shield up to protect yourself. And Go Again means my attacks are so quick, I'm hitting you so many different times, and you don't know what's coming up next after my first light attack. Is it the right hand? Is it the left hand? Like, is it a big kick? Like, man, like now that you've put it that way, like you'd better be putting out your next videos about all these keywords really soon. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I definitely will. I don't. There's a couple things that I want to do. There's one script I've written, and then there's another script that I'm really excited about, but it is contingent on some other things that I can't control yet.
Sure.
But rest assured, I will definitely be making a video about each keyword that I can write about. There might be one that I'm just like, there's nothing here. There's always something, but I could say that.
You seem pretty creative enough to find ways. Like I didn't realize how excited I would be to deep diving into Go Again and what you can do with that. Like, what does it mean to play a non-attack action with Go Again? What does that? What does that look like conceptually, as opposed to like abstract in the game where you're just playing a card?
Right.
So it'd be very interesting to see, I guess what you come up with. I'm going to put you on the spot there for that, because
it'll be when I first thought about it, because it really is true that Phantasm was like one of the reasons why I fell in love with Flesh and Blood. Like because I bought the Prism Precon, the Leviathan Precon, and the Bolton Precon, and I gave my wife the Leviathan Precon to play against me as Prism, and I attacked with a Herald, and I was like, this is so cool. Look at the above rate damage I'm doing. And then she put out a 6 block or a 6 attack, and it blew up, and I was like, I am in love with this game. Because I understood in that moment what that actually was. And it wasn't real. This attack wasn't real. So it needed to be believed in order to do damage. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. That you need to believe the illusion. And all of that stuff, like I knew I wanted to make a video about that, but when I had sat down to write Phantasm, I was like, oh my God, there's so many of these. Like I could write an essay about every single one of these bolded words. Yeah. So yeah, it's very fun. Like I'm excited.
The way you described Phantasm was amazing. Because you were like,
thank you.
From a fantasy player that I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons my whole life, I actually struggled with sort of your concept at first. I'm like, high intelligence, high wisdom people always saw through things that were fake illusions and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. But when you contextualized it in your Phantasm video, that they were too preoccupied to see these sleight of hand moments, and Reinhardt's too big or too simple-minded to care about these fake things being thrown at him, that he just
Right.
shoves them to the side. I was like, that is a fantastic analogy and a way to put it. And
Right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
just thought it was a great way to do it and help me kind of understand more, because at first I was kind of like fighting your argument at first, and I was like, okay, you
Right.
know what,
Right.
you convinced me in the end. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a really
I'm
good way
glad.
to
I'm
put it.
glad. Yeah. Yeah. There was a little bit of pushback in that video. I had a couple of commenters who were like, yeah, I'm not buying it here. I think it's this and this. And that's totally fine. I
Oh
actually,
yeah.
one of the main goals with Gorganian Tome and is not so much to be completely right all the time. It's like, these are, when you're writing essays, especially essays about the arts, is you're like, I'm going to write I'm going to examine Cormac McCarthy's The Road through a deconstructionist postmodernism perspective. And it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I doubt Cormac McCarthy was thinking about that in the postmodern sense, but sure, you can. But the idea is to analyze, to treat Flesh and Blood as though it is a piece of art, which it is.
Yep.
Treat it as a piece of art and examine the piece of art from different perspectives, so as to start a conversation, a deeper conversation about this thing that we all love, right? And so disagreement is actually really good, because if I say, this is what I think Phantasm is, I hope somebody out there is like, that's not right. I have a better idea. And then they go and write their essay examining Phantasm from a different perspective. And now we have multiple content creators all examining this game and providing different interpretations and ideas for what is actually happening when you do it. And that is how you build, an artistic basis to talk about something. So yeah, I'm glad I convinced you of my argument.
Well,
but go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say that what I liked about it was that you challenged my preconceived notion of what
Sure.
something like an illusion would be. And I still have that when it comes to something like fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons. But what you've done is, in the world of Flesh and Blood, you've let me accept that it can also be this way. And smart people, intelligent and wise people, can be still fooled.
Right.
And so you can have both. I don't just have to have one way to look at this. And
Sure.
So
Totally.
you've opened my eyes to looking at it in a different perspective.
Totally.
Yeah. And so that's what I think is really good about like the way it was delivered, and like you said, having these conversations and, getting people to come back with, maybe their, not necessarily argument, but a rebuttal as to why or why
Sure.
not.
Right. Different interpretation. Yeah. Awesome. No, I'm glad. Like this is the stuff that makes me like so happy that I'm doing this. Like when I hear people say like they, mixed emotions, happy, changed their mind. Like these are, I didn't realize this at first. Like I thought I was just making videos because I really like to make videos. But what I've realized is I love the responses from people.
Yeah.
Almost as much. Like when I'm writing, I'm like, I wonder what they're going to think about this.
Yeah.
I wonder what people are going to think about this idea right here in this paragraph. It's so cool. That's why I also respond to every comment.
Yeah.
I love to, because I love to. It's just so cool.
that engagement.
Yeah, it's so fun. Yeah. Anyway.
So keeping with the creative process, can you kind of describe sort of how you go about one of your videos? Because like most content creators, even us, we just talk about like recent news and events. We interview guests. We're not doing a lot of original research or making thesis statements about game mechanics. Where do you get this idea from?
So a lot of it is just kind of like, I'm just a pretty passionate guy. Like what usually ends up happening is I see something and I'm like, that's really cool. And then in like 2 months, I know everything about it, because it's like, because I have to. It's just kind of how I am. Like, it's just a weird obsessive thinker about, if I find something I enjoy thinking about, I will continue to think about it until there is no more thinking about it. And so the process of the videos is like, I'm just always kind of on the lookout for things that I am interested in terms of the game. Like, because I talk about the game and I look at the game all the time. Like I'm on February probably every day.
Yeah.
Or I'm watching a video, I'm consuming other people's content. And I'm kind of just always in the back of my mind thinking like, oh, what about that? That's interesting. And then the process becomes, I start writing about a subject and researching it at the same time. So like I'm writing the thoughts and the feelings that I'm having about something at the time while also researching things like, like the Phantasm video, right? So while I was writing the Phantasm script, I was looking up a lot of stuff that ended up getting cut. So like I had a whole section in the video about magicians and how magicians are telling a story as well, right? And the magicians actually operate on a similar function to storytellers, that they employ similar tricks. And there was this whole thing where I was talking about a video done by Wired and the anatomy of a magic trick, and then eventually, like as I was going through the script, I'm like, this is just so bloated and it's not working. Yeah. So like I get to the end, I record it, and I'm like, ugh, and I throw that out. That's like way too much. So I throw that part out, and then I'm like, I read through the script again. I'm like, now I'm missing something here, in between this part. So then I go back and I find something else that I can fit there. And so that's why the videos takes so damn long, because it takes me forever to write them. Not because I'm like typing slowly or because I don't write. It's that I'm writing the essay and then I'm like deleting half of it. Well, not deleting, moving to a different document. I don't delete anything. I just move it to a different document, and then it exists somewhere as untitled .docx. And I don't remember where it is and I can't find it. And then, but then I go back and I rewrite sections of the script, and then I go, okay, that's better. This is actually so much better than the original. I need to rewrite the original paragraph, blah, 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 blah. And then I edit, and that takes forever because I'm not a particularly strong editor.
I feel you.
Yeah.
So is it just like a feel thing? So you get your story written, and like you said, it feels bloated and too much. Is it just like a feel on how you sort of look at it and what you're going to remove, and how does then that contextualize the rest of it? Because you take a piece out, and I would imagine that later in the script or in the video, you're referring to something that you've already taken out, and that's right. That piece is no longer there.
Yeah. No, it can be a nightmare in that regard. Like, I think I just have enough experience. Like, basically all of my adult life has been working with documents, and like I was a technical writer for the Air Force for like 7 years. Every job I've ever held outside of like that one restaurant job I had for a couple of months has been writing in some way. So I just have a lot of experience with documents and writing. But you're right. I mean, that is one of the, like, a challenge with the script is like just cutting things out can definitely lead to problems later. For example, just a little peek behind the curtain is at the beginning of Flesh and Blood as a fighting game, that original section at the beginning where I talk about the different mana systems, that actually was kind of a failure on my part that I ended up leaving in because I thought it was a good enough intro, right? So the mana systems actually kind of came into play a little bit later in the video, but it was that later part was tied to something that made the video too bloated and confusing.
Right.
But as for advice for people, or if anybody is interested in writing video essays, and essays in general, like if you're in college right now, for example, listen up, because this is something that your English teacher probably didn't teach you, which drives me crazy, is that as long as your argumentation is speaking towards your thesis, you're golden. You're going to get an A on your essay because that's all you have to do. Like where essays start to falter is when their points are not directly tied to their thesis, and that's it. So if your thesis is Flesh and Blood is a fighting game, and I start talking about butterflies in a meadow, that's like, cut that shit out and only speak to what is in your thesis. And so that's that as my, constant mantra in my mind as I'm writing scripts is basically what allows me to not worry about it anymore, because I look at the paragraph and I go, does this speak to my thesis? No, cut it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit more about that video, Flesh and Blood as a fight scene. For me personally, that was the video that got me hooked onto your channel.
Cool.
As is 16,000 other people.
No, fighting game is
the
the
fighting
one.
game.
Oh, sorry.
Not the fight scene. Yeah.
No, they're confusing. Their titles are like really similar.
Yeah, so I'm just pulling the hipster card here and saying I subscribed to you before you were big. Yeah, that's right.
We're very pro hipster here.
I love it. But I'm fascinated, and we've talked about it a little bit here, but I'm always fascinated by the game outside the game, even beyond
Mhm.
how we feel as the players that are directly involved. But when it comes down to the game in the context of a tournament, or even something like the roar of the crowd, as
Mhm.
you know, as the defeated player lays down their cards and the winning player, you know, stands up and
Mhm.
lifts their hands up in the air, like what is it that compels you to examine a game not only from the perspective of the mechanics themselves and also their impact on the players, but really on the entire environment as a
Mhm.
whole? Like that's what spoke to me most about that essay, and I'm just
Right.
very curious, like how do you even conceptualize that?
Yeah. So the way that I guess I think about it is, and this is one of the reasons why I think TCGs in general are so beloved by the fans of TCGs, is that when you're so there's a degree to which you can subscribe to any game, right? There's like people who play Diablo 4, and then there's people who hit level 100 after a couple of weeks, and they make content about it, and they're, you know, they make builds and they put them online, and blah, 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 and, you know, on and on and on and on and on. And then there's the people who, you know, they have Marvel Snap, and they play the cards that they got for free, and they don't care if they made, you know, I got silver this season, woohoo, you know. And then there's people who like start Marvel Snap Zone, and they analyze the data and they put up all that stuff. And in my mind, all of this is all part of the game. So like if you're playing Diablo 4 and you go to Icy Veins and you look up your build guide, your leveling guide, you're playing an extra part of the game, which is participating in a community, right? So the Diablo 4 community put together this thing so that more community members have more information. And TCGs have like some of the biggest game to offer in terms of like the number of permutations of the game, in terms of the that there's more to being a TCG player than playing a game. There's the going to your local store and seeing that guy, or seeing that new guy and you're like, "Oh, I'm so glad he's back," or that new girl and you're like, "Oh, I'm so glad she's back." But she doesn't look so happy this week, blah 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 blah. All of this is part of Flesh and Blood. That is all part of the Flesh and Blood experience, or Magic experience, Pokemon experience, you know, whatever. Is this idea of like um that you tell these stories not about like the most interesting mechanics that ever happened in the game. You tell the story about like that one time you saw, you know, the person you taught to play beat somebody else, and you're like, that was such a cool moment to see. Or like when the person you taught to play beats you. These are, how do I want to put this? These are all part of the experience of the game itself. And it's I guess it's incorrect in my opinion to think of the game as the game and then the community as the community. Does that make sense? Like they're together.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And selling cards, that's part of it. Like you open the card and you're like, oh cool, I got this legendary I'm not going to use. Sell, right? That's a part of that's part of the experience. That's part of the Flesh and Blood experience, where it's like you can even imagine it like Vorthosy if you want, where it's like you main Dorinthia and you pull scabskin leathers out of your pack, and you're like, well, these don't go with Dorinthia. I'm going to take them back to Solana and sell them, and get my Valiant Dynamo.
Yeah.
Everyone's saving up for, right? And then everybody has their own kind of like specific experience of how they got into the game. People remember the first legendary you pulled. I pulled Vambrace of Determination. That was my first legendary. Everybody remembers like the first Fable you pulled, except for me because I haven't pulled one.
Me neither.
And
No worries.
yeah,
Sorry, guys.
everybody remembers, you know, the first time they really realized how to block, for example. I remember the first time I finally realized it was after watching, I think it was Arsenal Pass, and then I was employing the techniques in like a felt table match, and I was like, oh, got it. Got it. I finally understand how to block. So yeah, all of that stuff is just, I think this is why TCGs are so beloved though, because they offer game even outside the game, right? They offer like you can watch markets, and there's so many ways to even just get into a TCG. Like you can do the Stackswell route or the Fluke Box route, right? Where it's like Fluke was just interested in investing in something and then selling it, and then he had like a total change of heart, and he was like, actually, I want to play, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to set up a single shop, and like now he's part of this big community of people, and he didn't it wasn't because he loved to play Flesh and Blood. It was for a totally different reason. Yeah, I guess did that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. No, it
Okay, cool.
makes so much.
Okay,
It makes so much sense when you put it that way. Even in the way that you describe TCGs as being so much more compelling than even the most fun, most competitive, most well-designed video game. Fundamentally, the way I would engage with that video game is I would sit down at my computer and I would boot up the matchmaking service and play the game, and I would be upset or happy within the
right,
context of the game, and maybe I'll post something to Reddit or a
right.
forum, and that might be the end of my engagement. I'm not going to the LGS, I'm not meeting people in real life, I'm probably
Hmm.
not going to local tournaments and all of that. And yeah,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
mentioned that there's so many different segments of the community that I don't want to say are forced to interact, but happen to interact through this shared medium of
Hmm.
Flesh and
Hmm.
Blood in this case, similar
Right,
to the way we engage with the community around us. And
right.
yeah, no, that's awesome. So you took all of those thoughts and just conceptualized all of them into the Flesh and Blood as a fight scene video. Did that video get the response and engagement that you were expecting?
At the time, yeah. I thought that video, because that was like the first video that actually got any amount of like people talking about it.
Right.
Like I put that one out, and I remember like Bryn from the Banished Zone talked about it. Heiner, that video, for example, got me my first Patreon subscriber. In Heiner, he runs a really big store here in Germany. Shout out to Heiner. He also he saw that video and he hit me up and he was like, by the way, we want you to come to our battle hardened in Germany next year. So you're going to do that, right? And I'm like, you're damn right. I'm going to do that.
Nice.
Nice.
So in terms of like personal success, I was like, wow, I got that on the third video. That's cool. And I figured after Flesh and Blood is a fighting game, though, that video would have gotten more views and got more talked about. Because I personally feel like that video. Well, no, I don't know. I love all my children, but
it
like,
it
but
speaks to me as like a community builder because it has a broader scope is
right,
the way
yeah,
I
yeah,
would put it, right? Because it's
yeah,
not just trying to look at the game mechanics and why they may be narratively satisfying or better reframed in a way,
sure,
but
right,
yeah,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
you're talking in the fight scene video, you're really touching on all those community aspects.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I thought that yeah, it almost like that video might become sort of an anthem for the Flesh and Blood community. Not that I like expected it and I'm like,
Yeah.
damn it, why aren't I the anthem? But just like kind of interesting that that video didn't get like more watched. Um as a result of Flesh and Blood as a fighting game. Because while I think Flesh and Blood as a fighting game might be the better essay, I think that Flesh and Blood as a fight scene is something I have more expertise in, talking about like fiction. Yeah, just because I know a lot more about fiction than I do about fighting games. Like I know a decent amount about fighting games, but nothing compared to fiction. So yeah, I'm ultimately happy with the response though, because like I think the people who liked it and loved it really really loved it, and they really loved that was my attempt at going about as like oh never mind I was just about to dive into like a 20-minute discussion on like postmodernism and sincerity and stuff, but like that's probably my most sincere video where it's like I'm trying to be vulnerable as a content creator to generate an emotional response for people, um, because I wanted to,
Yeah.
right? I wanted to be vulnerable in front of a big group of people so that we could all feel that emotion together. That's why like when I said that damn fist bump, I'm genuinely like I had to do that one like 4 or 5 times to make sure I got it right, to get that line correct. And I had to put myself in that emotion. Like I had to really force myself to feel that way, because it's hard to do that when you have like headphones and a microphone in front of you. You're alone in your office, to generate that emotional response. I think is really important for that video, because that's what that video is about,
Yeah.
is feeling emotional when you play this game.
Would you, and this is just a thought that crossed my mind, but would you consider the way in which people engage so deeply and passionately about something like Flesh and Blood to be similar to the way people can engage with something like sports, like their fandom of their
Mm-hmm.
local sports team, be it as a player or as a spectator or
Mm-hmm.
through any one of the various support roles around
Mm-hmm.
sport, and you're talking about it between matches and engaging
Right.
with it in all these different ways. Would you consider it to be similar?
Totally. I think it's actually really, really similar. This is actually kind of a video idea I had. It's very early days on it. Like I don't really have much of a thesis for it yet. Maybe I'll develop it right now. But
Mm.
but yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of similarity because like I can go play basketball or soccer, right? Like but that's not gonna it's a similar but not the same feeling as like my connection to the Utah Jazz because I'm from Utah, right? So I love that NBA team, and I can't really watch their games anymore because they're always on at like 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
But I really 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 love that basketball team. So while I go, and I think a lot of people do this too, where like you when you're a kid you go to the court or a field or whatever and you do something badass and you kind of imagine yourself how you saw your hero, your sports hero on the rink, court, field, what have you. Like, I used to imagine John Stockton's like one of my favorite players of all time. And I used to imagine like I'm out on the court and I'm shooting my basketball and then I get the pass from John Stockton himself, even though he was like 38 at the time. And like super gonna retire. I'm like, but when I get to the NBA, it'll be no problem. But yeah, so I think that there's actually a lot of a lot of similarities between the two. Where like, I play Dromai a lot. That's probably the hero I play the most, and I look up to Ian and Jamie Faulkner and Mara Faris. Like I look up to those players because I love the way they play, and they play my hero on like the biggest stages, and there's an emotional investment just like it would be with the Utah Jazz, where it's like and in some ways it's even more so because like I watch them so intently to learn how they play Dromai. I mean, I paid or I did a coaching session with Jamie just to learn. Like I just wanted to know, and with no intent of like winning a calling or anything. It was just like I just want to know. And that conversation was really eye-opening for me from his perspective. But so whenever I see him play, I'm like, go Jamie. So that's I definitely see a lot of similarities between those things because and you see it all the time. Like there's discords for illusionists, there's sections of discords for illusionists, there's sections for warriors, right? Everybody's on the warrior team, the guardian team, the illusionist team. And especially in Flesh and Blood, people are like religious about
Oh yeah.
some of these like classes and heroes, like the League of Leviah or the Cult of Azalea. I mean, they call themselves a cult.
Yeah, it's no, this was really great. And just to repeat, I do think this is, it's my favorite video, and it's really hard for me to choose. They're all so high quality. But if
Thank you.
anyone listening has not watched Flesh and Blood as a fight scene, and you think you might be interested, please, yeah,
Yeah,
give
please
it a
do.
watch. Yeah.
Shay, it looked like you were about to say something.
I didn't realize I muted myself.
Oh, okay.
But we've kind of talked about this concept before, and in your Flesh and Blood as a fighting game, you also talk quite a bit about it in people find an affinity with a hero in Flesh and Blood, whether it be the art style, whether it be mechanics, or even something we touched on earlier, opening their first legendary. You're like, I opened a grasp. Guess I'm playing Viserai because I got this power card. And players invest that time into that hero and fall in love with that hero, and then start to learn the nuances and intricacies, and you become better and you find more success, which I also feels like that propels you to keep playing that hero to get better and better, because winning is exciting and fun. And I guess I'll segue into the Flesh and Blood as a fighting game. There's sorry, it's got like over 16,000 views at this point. Where did
Still
you
blows my mind.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's awesome. Where did you come up with the idea for this video?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So like in the video I say when I sat down with my friend Jake, the guy who told me about the game, and we played, I said that exact line to him. Like that is actually a true thing that happened, where I was like, this reminds me of a fighting game. That wasn't for the video, because he and I, so Jake, that same guy, he actually edits some videos for me. He edited Phantasm for me. He's the one who got me into fighting games many years ago, like 2016 about. He and I played fighting games for years and years and years and years, and Magic together as well. When we started playing Flesh and Blood, I was like, whoa, this game really does remind me of a fighting game. And that has always been on the back of my mind. Like ever since I started playing in 2021 at Monarch, like he and I sat down to play the game online because he's in the US, I'm in Germany. But we played the game online and I was like, whoa, I could totally see this as a fighting game. Whoa, 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 whoa. And then going on and learning more, I felt that way as well. And then like I said, I took a break. Well, not a break. I just couldn't find the cards. Yep. So I put Flesh and Blood on the back burner for a while. And then when I came back and I saw Dromai and that she was like a puppet character in a fighting game, I was like, holy shit, it just keeps going. And so this video idea has always been there. And it was, and originally I wanted to make the Prism video after Flesh and Blood as a fight scene. And then you can see my upload dates. There's a huge gap between Flesh and Blood is a fight scene and Flesh and Blood is a fighting game, and that's because I was hell bent on putting out Prism after Flesh and Blood is a fight scene, which is why the titles look a little weird when they're right next to each other in the YouTube channel, right? Because I couldn't get Prism to work, and I was like, well, if I can't get the Prism script to work, what am I going to do? And then I was going through my list of like video ideas that I had, and I was like, oh, I could probably do Flesh and Blood as a fighting game now. And so I wrote it and I just kept going and going and going and going and going. And then the video came out and now I'm writing for the Wraith Times now.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It was like, okay, cool. Yeah, speaking of, I need to write that next article. Oh man. Yeah, if you guys haven't read those, that's actually an expansion of the theory. So like I'm going deeper on the fighting game thing now.
Yeah, need to check that out. Yeah.
I will, yeah. So oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna do a follow-up, a little bit off topic. Do you have a release schedule for your videos, or they just kind of come out whenever you get there?
So the goal right now is to develop a release schedule.
Okay.
I think by bringing on Jake, my buddy, to help me with the editing, I think I can get a little bit closer to the idea of a release schedule.
Sure.
The goal is to like no more than 2 months. Even though I just broke that rule, but like no more than 2 months between videos, because it's like, because like, you know, I work a job and
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, and I got the dog that I got to take care of and, you know, he's a hellion and, and you know, we're traveling, right?
Yeah.
Like my wife's a teacher, so we're about to go into summer break and it's going to be pretty hard because we're going to be doing stuff during summer break. But yeah, so it's like I'm definitely of the opinion that like if I force myself to put the script out too early, but if I force myself to put the script out before it's done and the video's bad, that's much worse than just waiting or like taking more time to finish the video.
For sure.
Especially right now, you know, like if I had like 50 Patreon members and there was, you know, and I had like 3,000 subscribers and I had announced that I would release a video on the second Tuesday of every month, then it's like, okay, now it's go time. Like I have like an actual financial vested interest to make sure that I do this when I say I'm going to do it. But right now it's definitely like, let's try to get one.
Okay. So jumping back into Flesh and Blood as a fighting game sort of deep dive, was it frustrating for you to see people sort of like fit a square peg in a round hole by using these archetypes that you kind of go into in detail in that video about like the rush down versus aggro concepts?
Right. Yeah. Yes. Because, and I understood why, because that's what I did as well. I was like, Icelander is a control hero. And every time I said it, I was just like, is she though?
Yeah.
But yeah, so like, I think one of the things I very much subscribe to is the idea of like giving things names gives them power, right? So like if you name something, if you never name your dog, you're kind of a weird psychopath. But like if you never, once you name your dog, the dog is imbued with a sense of power, right? In terms of like it's a named thing, it's an important thing. Using the hand-me-down names of Magic, I think, keeps Flesh and Blood from becoming bigger. Because we don't have our own nomenclature. We don't have our own. I mean, we do have our own nomenclature. We do have our own vernacular for various things, right? Like fatigue or syncing. Like I love syncing. I
Yeah,
love that
syncing's
word.
Great.
I could do a whole video on syncing because
Yeah.
I love the concept of sync. I think it's just so cool that exists, and that's born out of just the community existing. But when you use hand-me-down names from a game that you don't want to be associated with, right? And not for any particular like we hate Magic and Magic players, but just like you don't want to be. We're a different game.
We want to stand
Magic.
alone.
Yeah, we're not Magic Light.
Yeah.
This game isn't a different version of Magic. It's its own game, and I see it all the time on the Reddit where people come like, in that part in the video where it's like, I used to play Storm in Magic. What should I play in Flesh and Blood? And that one's kind of easy. You just tell them Kano. But like, or like I used to play Infect. It's like, you know, I can't help you here. Like there's a lot more to this than just like what you used to play in Magic. Like for example, you could probably find me on Reddit, but like somebody posted, I used to play, or I want to get into Flesh and Blood. What should I play? And I said, okay, there are two questions that you need to answer here. Number one is, what do you normally like to play in RPGs? And number two, where do you feel most comfortable in a card game? Like first, like 2-part question. How experienced are you with card games? Number two, where do you feel most comfortable within card games? Right. And so if they say very experienced combo player, then it's like, okay, cool. But you can't just say that. You have to answer the first question as well, which is what happened when this person posted this. They said, oh, well, I play combo control decks in Magic. And it's like, okay, cool. That's great. In that game, you're not role playing as a hero. You're like this weird mythical planeswalker creature that can like summon lands or something.
Yeah.
And so I need you to answer that first question, because if you don't answer the first question, I can't direct you to a hero that I think you're going to like, the RPG question. And this is all born from the idea that we're still using these hand-me-down names from Magic. What I would rather do, and like if we end up not landing on Rushdown, All-Rounder, Zoner, and Grappler for fighting games, like if we don't end up using those, that's totally fine. I'm fine with not using those. But what I want to do is, and what I wanted that video to do, was get people thinking about, what are we actually doing in Flesh and Blood? What are the win conditions? Because aggro doesn't fit. It doesn't fit Flesh and Blood in the way that we think it does. Like aggro, I said this when I did an interview with Push the Point, but aggro and Magic is very different from aggro and Flesh and Blood. And it operates on a fundamental axis that does not apply in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah. Like
at all. Where you put a 1/1 down on the table, and if you like block that, or if you use the 1/1 to block, you are screwing up actively as the aggro player. Whereas in Flesh and Blood, as the rushdown guy, you absolutely are going to need to block at some point in that game, whether that's to prevent an on hit or to, keep a crucial tempo swing going or something like that, right? And just the existence of blocking itself means that we need to think about it differently. And so that's what that video is for. But anyway, go on.
For such a, I mean, I'm just thinking about the broad terms control, aggro, as it relates to something like Magic, and even something like control is so broad. It means totally different things to different Magic players as well. It's like,
Right.
Do you enjoy being able to answer your opponent's threats? Do you enjoy inevitability? Do you enjoy permission? And I have a feeling that the word is so vague on one side, and then it gets transmuted into a whole different framework of a game in Flesh and Blood. And it just sets people up for wrong expectations. Like someone says they like control, but they actually just liked permission control and saying no when their opponent tried to do something, but they don't care about the inevitability aspect. So a lot of people say, oh, you should play Oldham. They block a lot. Like, but
it's like that. Those are two totally different things. Yeah, totally. Like, and somebody who loves the permission magic, you're totally right. Is like there is no guarantee that what they're going to like to do is think about their hand in terms of block value and not attack value. There is absolutely no sense whatsoever that those two things are going to translate for the same player.
Yeah, and I mean, you're probably the person that I need to say this to the least out of everyone, because you have a degree in English, but words are power, right? Like by defining your language, you get to precisely help people. And I see that you're in the trenches on Reddit helping people, reframing it as RPG characters, which I think is great, because people resonate so strongly with those characters.
Yeah. It's definitely like if you play any amount of RPG, you're probably more likely to find your hero than if you played Magic. Like if you played Diablo, what did you play in Diablo? You played Barbarian. I got the hero for you, baby. Yeah. Let's go. So that's definitely the kind of the thrust for that video was not so much that we need to adopt all fighting game stuff, because that's just trading one set of hand-me-downs for another set of hand-me-downs. But the real thrust of the video was like, let's actually start talking about this. Like, it is obvious, I think at this point, that Flesh and Blood should not be using the terms from Magic. It is biting us in the ass all the time, because it's like we have aggro, combo, and control, and fatigue, or like, and fatigue is kind of control, but it's also like maybe mid-range, who knows? Like, and it's because we just the community hasn't done the work to actually establish what the differences are and come up with our own plan.
That's probably one of my favorite things about the video, is that you challenge this notion of what archetypes the decks can be. One of the things that I personally don't like is I don't like the concept of this is just the way it is, because that's the way it's always been. And nobody challenges, well, why do we do it that way? It doesn't make sense. When we look at it, we're like, it doesn't make sense to call control, because all you're doing is blocking and defending. That was the original term of control. It was like, oh, you just block. Well, what are you controlling if you're just blocking? You're letting your opponent do whatever they want. There's no control there.
No control whatsoever.
So, and with your video reaching so many people, I hope that it does do that spur, that thrust that you mentioned, that we start talking about a new way to define what a deck is. And because you're right, it only encapsulates anywhere from like 20 to 60% of what a deck is when you call something control or fatigue.
Right.
And we need broader strokes, or maybe we don't. We find different ways to name stuff, because like every hero that we would consider something to be aggro, like you touched on in your video, Fi and Briar, they do it totally different.
Different.
And so it's not fair to necessarily sometimes always call them, like an aggro or something like that. But they have, different dynamics within the deck.
Right. Yeah. Like Briar's almost like a power-up character, and Fi's like he's like a little bit more of a consistent damage output dealer with a combo package as well. But like, that was the other thing too, is like combo, other than like Kano, I mean, there's not really a combo deck like in Magic. There's like 700 million different, like, oh, I played this artifact and win on the spot combos.
Can wrap up talking about Flesh and Blood as a fighting game here, and I guess before we leave off, I do have to ask, and I guess basically accuse you of collusion with Capcom and the release date of Street Fighter 6. You have cost me a lot of money over the past couple of months.
I'm actually a sleeper agent for Capcom.
Yeah. And
there's many of us. We were all activated.
They better be paying you royalties. That's all I'm saying, because I've spent on the game hitbox, and it's not just me. Nice. It's a lot of people.
I'm glad you went with hitbox. That I love. I have mine right here.
Ooh.
Oh, this is an audio only podcast, isn't it?
That's okay. I'm not. You can show us.
Okay.
Felix will appreciate it.
We can geek out. That's awesome.
Yeah. It used to have Blade Runner art.
Amazing.
But I took it out because the Blade Runner art is really old now. It's just it's just a piece of paper underneath the plexiglass, so it was like getting kind of old. But fighting games, man, they're they're pretty cool, right? Like
Yeah.
I actually liken fighting games a lot to card games because they have a very similar thing where, like, you know, the amount of people who play League of Legends dwarfs, I think, all of card gaming, maybe combined, maybe.
The amount of people is astronomical. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
For one game, you know, and the same goes for fighting games. Like the FGC is not very big, but the people who are into the FGC are as passionate about it as people who are into the TCG community, right? Or any given TCG, right? And I think that this is going to be a weird analogy, but like I remember we adopted a dog 2 years ago, and it was as a puppy, and this puppy he was a monster puppy, and I love him now, but I remember reading in the early days where I was like, I'm not gonna be able to do this. Like this dog is way too frustrating. Reading online that frustration actually helps people develop a deeper connection with something. If everything is easy sailing, easy going, you're gonna kind of like, even if you really like the experience, you're not going to develop a really deep connection with it. And the frustration is actually a really key aspect of developing a deeper connection to something. So while my dog annoys the shit out of me, I probably love it more than anything else, except, you know, like my wife and I think that's it. Um, and having health insurance in Germany, that's another one. That's love that.
Yeah, it's great.
So that's like a third,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, so those three things are like really, really, really important, and all three of them are very frustrating. And I would say the same thing for fighting games. Like I have never been so pissed in my life as when I play fighting games. Like nothing has made me more angry. I also am like inextricably linked to fighting games now. Like I'm never going to be able to not play fighting games.
Yeah.
Because, this goes for everything, right? Like if you've ever learned to play an instrument, for example, sometimes you want to throw the guitar through the window, and then it also remains one of your most prized possessions, right? Or
Yep.
drums or whatever, you know, anything that requires frustration in order to get better at.
It all
Flesh and
ties
blood is the
back
same way.
to that narrative arc that you were talking about, right? Like if everything was just happy, 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 then there's no story there. It's just
Right.
milk toast, everyone's fine, everything's great. You know, you need that adversity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Like, and I think armories are a great way to think about it as well. Where like, I go to my armory and I bring Briar one week and I lose, and I'm like, damn it. And then I go home and I rethink it, and so like there's this feud. It's like it's a friendly feud, but there's this feud where this guy plays Dromai at my armory every single week, and my goal has been to play a hero that gets him off of Dromai because I want to play Dromai, and we can't have two Dromais at the shop.
Oh, come on.
We can't. No, there's not enough people. There's only 6 people.
Right.
And the 6th is usually a new player. And if that new player is going to play against 2 Dromais, they're never coming back.
Yeah.
So I always bring Dromai with me. And if I see him play Dromai, I'm like,
you never get to play Dromai.
All right, fine. So then it's like, well, now I'm going to bring out Phi. Let's go. Because we always play against each other too. Every armory. Like, even if there's enough people that we wouldn't have to, for some reason we always get paired. I still haven't gotten him though. I still haven't gotten him off Dromai. I've tried, but that's been an emotional roller coaster for me in my local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just moving along with getting a spoiler card and being retweeted by James White, do you feel like you've broken through as a content creator at this point?
I guess so. Like it didn't, the thing that's weird is like, it didn't feel like it. Like when I saw James White comment on the Flesh and Blood as a fighting game thing, I about passed out. I was like, holy shit. I didn't expect that to happen. Like I went to Battle Hardened Germany and somebody came up to me and they're like, you're Gorganian Tome, right? And I'm like, whoa, that's a weird experience.
Yeah.
That's a very, very strange experience for me. Or, and then later that weekend, somebody was like, yeah, I read your post on Kugani Gaming's thing. Like I wrote an article about how to learn how to play Dromai. And he was like, yeah, you're the reason I play Dromai. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So like technically, if I look at Dylan from like a third person perspective, it's like that guy, I guess, has become like an official Flesh and Blood content creator.
Yeah.
But me, in the first person perspective, all of that stuff still surprises the hell out of me. Like, I didn't expect it to be so fast. Like, one of the things I said, because I talked to Kugane pretty frequently, one of the things I said to Kugane was, part of the reason why I'm making the videos on the schedule that I am and the content I'm making is that I'm playing a long game here. Like, I want all my videos. I have a mantra for I have three like requirements for my videos. One, they're evergreen, so you can watch them at any time and they will still be interesting.
Yeah.
They're not topical, right? I mean, if they're topical, it's by happenstance, like Prism, like the Phantasm video coming out at the same time as Dust Till Dawn, or Flesh and Blood is a fighting game at the same time as Street Fighter 6. So evergreen content. Number two is that they need to teach something. It's something about some subject. And number three is they need to deal with some form of emotion in some capacity. Like, you know, Story of Starvo is hate. Flesh and Blood is a fight scene is like the literally just emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
And Flesh and Blood is a fighting game is like this. I can't remember what I described the emotion to. But anyway, well, I'm rambling. I'm not talking about the question here. So the question of becoming a content creator is like, Gorganian Tome feels like a content creator. Dylan is still struggling with that concept.
Fair enough.
Right.
You know, if I personally had to put it like it being successful or broken through, however you want to look at it,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of things. What I would say is that they're intelligent, they're creative and well thought out. Like, you're doing something that nobody else is really doing, like we kind of mentioned. And it just, they're good. It is good content to watch. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just kind of looking at surface level numbers. For somebody that has like just under, 900 subscribers, you have thousands of views on your video. So like they're reaching out to people. They're enjoying that content. It looks like, and
yeah.
So, what you're putting out is good quality content, and you're probably going to see that.
The word content doesn't even feel appropriate because, I mean, the word content even bothers me when it's being used to describe something that's thoughtful, that's artistic, that's well crafted. Yeah. Like these are works of art, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
That's actually something that's really interesting to me, because I put this out on Twitter in the early days of Gorganian Tome, and I was like, I don't like the term content creator for any content creator, because content creator is like job haver or worker. It's like, what do you mean? Like a content creator, it doesn't, that's a, I understand why people use it, and I use it all the time now because that is the accepted terminology for it. But like I don't feel so much a content creator as I do a writer, right? Or like I don't feel like you guys are content creators, you're interviewers, right?
Yeah.
And because that's a very different thing, right? If you say everything is a content creator, then content is just kind of this like gloop of things that are vaguely associated with something. But for convenience sake, we have to say content creator. And so, yeah, I agree with both sides. Like, I agree with you, Felix, in the idea that like, I don't view my videos as like content. I view them as like individual pieces that I worked on, right? And the channel is like the collection of them. But I also totally understand why people think of it as like, oh yeah, he's a content creator. Anyway, there was something else I was going to say about that. I think it's gone.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We've been dabbling for a while here.
Yeah.
I guess just one more follow-up question to the idea of the channel. Do you have any ultimate goals or any thoughts that you might want to spill to our listeners about what the future holds for the channel?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, like, the success came a lot sooner than I thought it was going to come. Like, I remember back in the early days of like Flesh and Blood is a fight scene and Story of Starvo. So early days, this was like literally 5 months ago. Is like, I remember being very heartened by the idea that not so much the views, but that I had like 300 views and 20 comments. And that to me was like, this is awesome. this is really good, and this is indicating to me that the people who like this really really like it, because the whole reason why Gorganian Tome exists is because I wanted to watch it. I wanted to watch Ristic Studies of Fab, and I kept hoping that it was going to come, and it wasn't coming, and I was like, I'm just gonna do it then, right? Like I've always operated on this idea of like, if you want to read a book that reminds you of playing Bloodborne, I've said this on another interview actually. If you want to read a book that reminds you of playing Bloodborne, and you go look for it, you can't find it. Like it's really hard to find a novel that really reminds you of playing Bloodborne. Like yeah, you can go read H.P. Lovecraft, but you can't go read a book that reminds you of Bloodborne, like action packed eldritch horror, but with a sense of like ethereal madness and frightening horror, and but the horror is borne out through the violence, right? Like the closest thing I can think of is like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, but that's a Western novel. And so my whole thing is like, if you can't find that thing that you wished existed, that's probably a good indicator that you should be doing that thing.
Yep.
Right. Like with your guys's whole thing is like interviewing people and talking about the game from like a more casual emotional experience, right? Like at least that was my experience listening to the podcast. It's not so much like, what are the top 5 tips to compete at your next Battle Hardened?
Yeah.
Let's do a deep dive on every card and its competitive viability. It's more like the having a personal conversation with somebody. Yep. And that actually doesn't exist, right? Like that, well, I mean, it does now in the IP2 podcast, but like other than like Tommy Fresh, but Tommy Fresh kind of comes at it from a different angle. He's almost like he's got like a library of people that, you know, and he's talking about more topical things, where your guys' stuff feels a little more evergreen to me. Like it might be a little hard to go back and listen to an old Fresh and Buds episode.
Right.
Not to say that that's bad. It's just, it's 2 different types of content.
Yeah.
So the thing to get to the question now, 5 minutes after rambling, is that the goal for the channel is really to just keep putting out like new things to get the community talking. Like my ultimate goal for the channel is for people to talk about the game differently as a result of the videos, to change the conversation and to kind of to get people to think about the game in a different way. And the way I'm choosing to do that is to just continuously come out with surprising things that I don't think anybody ever expected before about the way to think about Flesh and Blood. Right. Cause like, yeah, it's just that's, I'm not a good enough player to ever make a splash in that way. I will never like come up with like the craziest deck that's gonna, you know, like, holy shit, this recontextualizes everything we thought about Flesh and Blood. But I will probably come up with a really cool analogy. And so I'm going to lean into my ability to come up with cool analogies.
You know, I think you're the perfect person for it with your background and your education. And, you know, we've already seen it in the few videos that you put out that you've talked about things that probably nobody or very few people have thought of and looked at it in a different light.
Well, and also I think a lot of people, one of the things that really surprised me, well, not surprised me, I don't know, I guess surprised me about Flesh and Blood as a fighting game video, is that so many people commented, I had this exact thought, but I didn't say it. I had this exact thought. I'd been thinking this when I played the game, but I didn't have the words to describe it. Or like, I'm so glad that you put this out because this is what I've always thought about Flesh and Blood. And I've said Mortal Kombat, but I didn't really think too much into it.
Yeah.
And it's like, cool. I'm glad that I can do that. Like I feel in a very privileged position at which I can sit at my computer for hours on end and think about why things are the way they are, right? Like a weird Flesh and Blood philosopher guy where like, it's just like, I get to do that. And not a lot of people get to do that, right? Yep. Not a lot of people work from home. A lot of people have to leave and they don't get a chance to think about stuff while they're working because they have to focus on their job. Yeah. So that I can do that for people is really cool. That's a really fun, amazing experience for me to be able to put to words what a lot of people are already thinking. Yeah.
No, those goals are so, I struggle for the words. Noble seems like a poor choice of words, but it's the one that comes to mind in that your goal is not to achieve a certain number of followers or to achieve a certain amount of views or comments, but to change the conversation, which is something that you already have done, and hopefully will be able to continue to do.
Right.
And definitely Shea and I will be rooting for you very hard to continue to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. I really do. No, it's awesome. It's really cool to meet other people. Like everybody that reached out to me has been in kind of like our similar vein, right? Where it's like we don't mind getting into some of the like emotional aspects of being a content creator or the emotional aspects of the game, and that's like my people. Like that's where I'm going to be happiest, is hanging out with people who can be like that.
Yeah.
And so like the followers and stuff, I think that all, to me, I pushed that aside a long time ago because I got some really good advice during my MFA from my professor. He's still like one of my favorite people of all time. His name is Pinckney Benedict. If you ever want to read any fiction by him, he's an amazing fiction writer. But he writes about Appalachian children. That's like that's his thing. That's what he's good at. He was raised in West Virginia, and that's the thing that he does, and he does it really well. He might be one of the best living Appalachian writers, and full stop. Like, he's just an incredible writer. What he told me a long time ago was that, like, if you're writing or if you're making something in order to be popular, then you're not going to be successful and you're not going to enjoy it. Whereas if you're making something because there's something that you have to make because you like it or love it, then you will eventually just find the people who also love it, and you will be more successful and you'll enjoy it. Right. And so I have to put all of those thoughts out of my head of like, I really hope to hit 1,500 subscribers by October or whatever. Like I'm about to do a giveaway, for example. When I hit 850, I'm going to announce a giveaway to do some like promo cards.
Yep.
And I'm going to do it because I think it'll be fun for the good deeds cards to go out to people. Thanks, Kugani, by the way, for doing that for me. I'm doing that because I feel like I should, not because it's like, oh, yay, I can't wait to get more followers. It's more like, okay, well, 850, this is probably something that a content creator should do. Like, I don't care about it as much.
Yeah,
but
you're not doing it to
like
drive the subscriber base.
Right. Because what I want to do is write essays. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I don't care about the number. I just want to write essays, but I should do it. Like this is like a eat your vegetables moment of like, okay, I'll do the giveaway,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, and thank you so much for those words of wisdom. Dylan, we've taken up so much of your time here, and I feel like we could just keep talking and talking, but one last question here is,
sure.
What's your favorite personal moment in Flesh and Blood so far? It could be from playing or from creating content or from spectating or being at an event, just your all-time favorite moment so far.
My all-time favorite moment. Okay, well, James White is like the de facto one, right? Like I have to just say that one.
Yeah.
Because that was like an all-time high for me of just like seeing that the dude who created the game was like, yeah, you're right. I was like, that was about as incredible of an experience as you can have. I was hoping to come up with one that was a little more history, though.
That's the ultimate trump card whenever someone tries to argue with you in the comments of your Flesh and Blood is a fighting game video.
Yeah, it's like, well, James White said yes, so there you go.
Yeah. But there's something about that. Like I get what you're saying, and we met James White at Worlds, but there's something about, I guess you could say hipster or grassroots about being in on the ground floor of the game, that you get to meet the guy that created this amazing game that we've all become passionate about. And that's a moment in time that a lot of people don't ever get to experience. Like people coming into Magic now don't necessarily get to meet Richard Garfield and sit down and have a conversation with him. Yeah. Right. Like, so there is, I like you said, it's kind of like low hanging fruit in a way, but it still is meaningful. Right. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like being a part of Flesh and Blood, having the creator of the game tell you that you were right about something is, I mean, just it's got to be it can't even be a cliche, like because it's not used enough to be a cliche. It just is the case. I would say that maybe my favorite gameplay moment of all time, though, was when I played. Remember when I told you not too long ago about the guy, the competing dromai player at my shop? So we went to an RTN in Pyramidens, and I didn't know he was going because I went with a couple of my buddies, and then we got there, and I was like, oh, there he is. He came, and so then we went into the shop, and of course we get paired against each other because we always get paired against each other. And so when we were getting ready to do this. Do our match, I was like, here we go. Like, this dude always beats me. Oh my god! But I feel like we're relatively on par with Dromai. We get to the end of the game, and I had pitch stacked a Command and Conquer so that I could try it, because we're talking like there's 30 seconds on the clock, and I draw that Command and Conquer. He swings with the Ender Eye. I pop it, and then he extends his hand across the table. That was probably like the most gratifying player moment.
Yeah.
Where it was like, because I don't get a lot of chances to play competitively. Like, there's just not a lot. So I do a lot of like competitive stuff either via Talishar or, that, right? And it's hard to feel those emotions when you're on like Talishar.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, like doing that at an RTN, like a slightly, even if it's just like an armory and a half, it was still like, oh my god! And then I ended up bubbling out at 9th at that tournament. I was so bummed about that.
There.
Yeah, gosh, I was so bummed.
Yeah,
because it was such a cool win. It was like my favorite win.
Yeah,
but yeah. So it'd be like James White, and then also popping my rival Dromai at the RTN.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Dylan, I think that wraps it up for us today. Thank you so much for joining us on this adventure and deep dive into you and your channel. It was super enlightening for myself and Felix. Where can people find you online?
Well, I just want to say thank you guys for having me on. It was awesome. It was. I wasn't sure what to think, right? Because like I'd listened to your guys' stuff, and I was like, they're really nice. This is going to be fun. I'm excited. But you never know how it's going to go before you meet somebody. Yeah. But this was a really fun experience for me.
Well, thank you.
To find me, you go to @Gorganian Tome on Twitter, or you search Gorganian Tome on YouTube. Or I guess you could do @Cathartigan as well. Although I think that's going to get sunsetted soon.
Fair.
Because like, man, I got a lot of followers from some of those videos.
Yeah.
And let's see, what was I going to say? Is there anywhere else? I don't think so. I still go by @Cathartigan on Discord, but mostly just go to the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Because that's where I hope people engage with me the most. Like Twitter's fun, but YouTube is where I'm like really putting my heart and soul into like making things.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning into this special episode of the IP2 podcast. You can find us on YouTube at IP2 Podcast, on Twitter at IP2 Podcast, and on Mastodon, IP2 Podcast at wraith.social. Thank you.
I gotta make one of those. Oh, 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
My wife got trapped outside.
This should be pretty easy edit.
This is way too much fun. Come on.
Dude, this is no. I meant this section where he gets up. No, this is so much fun. And like, again, we're like, an hour into this, and I'm just feel like I'm scratching the surface of this conversation with Dylan, and I don't know how much more time we can eat up of you, but this is a lot of fun. Like,
yeah, this is really fun. No, I mean, we can always have me back on. I'm fine with that.
I love that. Sorry, I just want to side note the people that we've had on the show. So everybody up to you and has been so passionate about every aspect that we've brought them on for. And so like, we're still passionate about the game. That's why we even have a podcast, but it's even just reinvigorating of having these different conversations and these different aspects and allowing us to like look at the game differently. And we talked to, you and you just the way you describe stuff. I'm already excited about how I'm going to look at Flesh and Blood going forward from this day, because I never really looked at it as a story-driven game. I looked at it as a mechanic game, and I just really enjoyed the flow and the way the give and take. And like Felix said, we're board gamers, and one of the things that got me into the game was that it's all the cards are multi-use cards, and that's something that hasn't really been explored in the board game world a lot, where you're holding a hand of cards and they do 3 different things, and you're like, well, what's the best way to do it? And Flesh and Blood excels in that mechanical aspect of the game.
Right. Yeah. It's just very interesting where like how backgrounds and various things like that can dictate the way somebody thinks about something.
Yeah.
Because where we started this podcast is I've only ever thought of games as a different type of story generator, right?
Yeah.
Like all of my favorite games, for example, Total War. I don't know if anybody's ever played a Total War
Big
game.
fan. Yep.
Love Total War games. And the specific reason why I love Total War games is because they tell me my own little unique story that nobody else gets to experience, right? It is my customized story based on my actions and various things that the computer does to create emergent narrative, right? And that to me is like the most fascinating thing in the world. Like so I think about it all the time, every day, is this concept of like emergent narrative and narrative being born from game. And so while some people might like, I'm not a min-maxer. Let's put it that way. Like I do not find joy in min-maxing. I find joy in the narrative that the game can put out. And there's nothing wrong with min-maxing either. I'm totally fine with people who that's how they enjoy the media. Enjoy the media however you like. I have no judgment. But for me, it's like I will absolutely take suboptimal things if it means that it tells a more interesting story for me personally. Right. I will absolutely lose a game early if it actually has a good ending. Right. Like I will allow myself to get killed by the imposing faction in Total War if it's like, wow, what a rise and fall. Like he burned the king burned too brightly and died. I'm like, beautiful. Delete save.
Delete save.